Hello and good afternoon from the World Economic Forum's annual meeting 2022 in Davos. Thank you to those who are in the room for joining us, and of course, thank you to everyone on our live stream who is tuning in to today's press conference. My name is Natalie Pierce, and I'm the incoming head of the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers community, a network of 15,000 young change makers driving dialogue and action for a more inclusive world in 500 hubs in 150 countries around the world. It is an incredible community, and I am joined also by an incredible lineup of panelists. It is an honor to moderate today's press conference, so thank you for being with us. We have a very exciting session in store. So let me tell you what we are announcing and what's happening in today's session. The Valuable 500 is a business collective made up of 500 CEOs and their companies at innovating together for disability inclusion. The Valuable 500 was launched at the annual meeting in 2019, and today we are here to launch another Valuable 500 initiative, Generation Valuable. To tell us more about this announcement and its importance, I am joined to my left by Caroline Casey. Caroline is the founder and director of the Valuable 500. We're happy and excited to welcome you back. We're also joined by Damon Jones. He is the Chief Communications Officer at Procter & Gamble. Thank you for joining us. And additionally, we're joined by Blanca Judy, who is the Chief Corporate Affairs and Engagement Officer at L'Oreal. And last, but certainly not least, we have a young global leader with us. His name is Gabriel Marcolongo. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Inclume.com. So welcome to today's panel. To start things off, Caroline, of course, I would like to ask you and invite you to announce Generation Valuable to the world, why it's created, and why we need it so badly.
Well, thank you so much, Natalia, and it's brilliant to have you leading and representing the Shapers community, who've been a huge part of informing us, actually, about how we can create inclusive cultures within our business. So thank you. And I have a huge smile on my face. This is absolutely fantastic. Somebody heard us today on media talking about launching Generation Valuable, Gen V, as we like to call it. And they were like, oh my gosh, for the first time, you don't sound like you're pleading, but you're leading. And I have to take a moment just to acknowledge everybody who's been in this journey, because 3 years ago, we came onto the main stage of the World Economic Forum with that iconic search for our 500 companies and their CEOs to work together as a collective, to transform the business system. We reached 500 on the 18th of May last year, so we just have our first anniversary. And here we are launching Generation Valuable, Gen V. Now, if we think about how we can amplify and accelerate change, our CEOs are hugely important. Those leaders make choices, those choices create culture, as John Amachi would say. They're the ones supporting and giving the permission internally in the business, because many companies have been doing stuff, right? But we need to scale that change, we need to institutionalize it, and we need to accelerate and amplify it right across all the different functions. It's why having corporate affairs here today is so important. And we need that leadership. But the power of Gen V is where we're going to see the change. So Gen V is an iconic search, which we launched today. We are looking for each of our valuable 500 companies and their CEOs and corporate affairs to nominate one of their young leaders in the business who has a lived experience of disability. They need to have 5 years within the business and be at managerial level. What would it look like if we had 500 disabled talent in a community informing our current leadership? So we're joining the dots. So there's 3 reasons for Generation Valuable to exist. Number 1, to help inform our C-suite so we can amplify and accelerate inclusive business quickly, faster and together. Secondly, we want to prepare the C-suite of tomorrow. We want to ensure that we see people with disabilities taking up these executive positions. We've done a piece of research with taught us to say, of our FTSE 100, not one person is declaring on having a disability from senior leadership level up. Now, if you do not have the leaders in the boardrooms or in the executive leadership, we will not see that voice in the business. So that's the other piece we really want to see. And lastly, most importantly, is to create a community of change that we can spread from our 500 in 2025 to the rest of the world and ensure that our young people are there. Now, 3 years ago when we launched the Valuable 500, we had 6 companies to be our first 5. We have 6 already who have nominated their Gen Vs, and we are delighted to say we have Procter & Gamble, we have L'Oreal, we are joined by Mahindra, and Omnicom, Deloitte, and Merck. And more excitingly, because I'm 50, so, you know, I'm older, we have 2 chairs, and our chair is Sam Latif from P&G, who is blind. I'm visually impaired, but she is blind and has had a huge influence on the business and accessibility. And she will be joined by KR Liu from Google, who is head of inclusive brands, and they will be chairing this community of 500. So that is it. I am hugely excited. I just want to thank everybody for being here, and thank the World Economic Forum, our partner, and the Nippon Foundation, our global impact partner, for, you know, this kind of, it was a world first with the Valuable 500. It's a world first now, hopefully, with Generation Valuable. We want 75 by the International Day for People with Disabilities on the 3rd of December, at least 75, so that we can start the program in 2023.
Thank you.
Very excited.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Up next, we've heard P&G is, of course, a Valuable 500 member. I would love to ask, what does this issue mean to you, and what progress in this area has P&G made?
Well, first of all, we need to start by thanking Caroline for her leadership, passionate, strategic, and impactful. And as you can imagine, it's hard to say no to anything she asks us to do from that. But for us, you know, this is a part of a broader citizenship initiative that is really aimed at equality for all people, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. And that starts within the walls of P&G by building what we call a disability confident culture, where people can come in and, to your point about getting into the C-suite, know that there is a role, that their contributions are wanted and are valued and are going to be nurtured over time. So this is a part of a journey that we need to make, and importantly, to make with other corporations. You know, this is not something that we view as a competitive effort, but importantly as a collaborative effort. So what are we doing at P&G? I mentioned it starts within our own walls, growing an equality-centered culture so that we can attract and retain talent. Lots of conversations here at Davos over the past week really about, you know, the war for talent. But when you can create an environment that nurtures and welcomes all people of all abilities, then that is a strong part. So we started with looking at how do we recruit, right? Are we equipping our recruiters with the knowledge, the insights, so that they can recruit people of all abilities? That's foundational. Second, we're looking at the people that are within our company who may be neurodivergent, right? And ensuring that we look at our policies, our practices, and our systems through conversation, but sometimes through the tough discussions, so that we really have people that are all along that spectrum, and that we're doing what we can to embrace their contributions, you know, really making sure that, again, we attract and retain that diverse talent. For our employees with disabilities, we're making this a very vocal and visible part of our equality and inclusion strategy. You know, Caroline and I have been spending some time talking about the importance of intersectionality, and as we've seen the need for gender equality and racial equality, people with disabilities is a very powerful, you know, intersectional community along with the LGBTQ+ community. So it's important that we just don't look at these as isolated strategies that require isolated efforts. We need to build this in and not bolt it on to the fundamental way that we are operating as a company. So that's what we're doing within the walls, but Procter & Gamble serves 5 billion consumers around the world. So how we serve consumers of all abilities matters too. And so Sam has been taking the lead for us as a company and helping us challenge many of the assumptions and the norms when it comes to our products. And it's challenging and pushing us to make sure that as we serve consumers, we are looking at their total product experience and making sure that they are included. Olay in 2021, developed a prototype of a jar that was accessible for people that may have some physical abilities. Simply trying to unscrew the cap on the top of a daily household product can become a huge moment of frustration and candidly exclusion. So, what we've done is we've looked at that, from people with, again, joint pain to more significant disabilities, and now have a product on the market in multiple countries that makes it easier. And so many of the things that we take for granted every day in the course of designing very simple products that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about, we can make a powerful difference. Pantene has committed to play a role in the accessibility of our advertising. So using a partnership with Navalins, which is a unique technology for visually impaired people who have difficulty reading and understanding traditional signage and therefore cannot be autonomous as they want to be in an unfamiliar environment. So we know that building an inclusive and welcoming environment for all people is not something that any one person can do, which is why the collaboration with our competitors and with the entire business community, as well as NGOs and governments, is really, really positive. The Valuable 500 asked us to step up and asked all of the 500 members to step up in a number of ways, which I think are important to reiterate because it really pushes us forward on the mission. Number one, to make sure that our workplaces were accessible. We had the accommodation policies and practices, and that was global. It's not enough to do things in a couple of your big markets where you can throw it on a brochure, but that needs to be the lived experience for each and every one of our employees, which is what we aspire to do. Number two, expand the talent pool. Recruit, retain, and develop people at all levels and get them into the C-suite. When you have that level of inclusion in the boardroom, things change, and that's incredibly important. And third, to really just continue to partner with business and enterprise leaders to just actively create products and services, because we know that doing good is good business, and that needs to be a fundamental part of that. So I'm excited to be a part of the journey, excited about what's next with Generation Valuable, but really just taking a moment to acknowledge the many people who we stand here representing, who have put in the hard work, who are having the tough conversations to make sure that these aspirations really do become reality.
And can you imagine that 500 times? Like, seriously, that's where the change happens. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love that. Doing good means good business. You've talked about disability inclusion for workplaces, employees, consumers, and communities worldwide. Blanca, do you want to weigh in on that too, and your thoughts?
I'd also like to start by thanking Caroline for her great initiative, and because it is moving the world, so you make a big impact to society. And Caroline and I are members of our inclusion and diversity board at L'Oréal, so it's a great joy for me to meet you there together with the other board members and learn from you. And I want to echo you, Damon, in many of the things that I will say. So for me, it's very important to have a very inclusive workforce, and disability is something that has been not looked at enough. I find that when you have members of your team that have disabilities, you become a better team and a better company. Your empathy grows, and empathy is one of the most needed leadership skills in today's world. If you look at the crisis through which we are living, and in our job, we are dealing with crisis on a constant basis. So empathy is one of the critical skills, but it also makes you make better products for consumers. So the moment you design with inclusion in mind, you benefit much larger groups of population. So your example of the jar, it can help anybody, a person who's older, it can help a person with some kind of problems in their mobility. Likewise, we have also been developing apps and things that can help with the visually impaired, but you can imagine that when you do that, you can also help people with dyslexia, or you can help people who are older. So it's important to have people with disability to understand how they view the world, because in looking at the world through their eyes, we can improve what we do. At L'Oréal, we have two programs that tackle this in a way together. We have a program for youth because we observed during COVID that youth was really suffering and there was very few opportunities for employment for youth. So last year we gave opportunities to 18,000 youth. This year it will be 25,000. And we have another program which intersects to some degree where we try to have around 2% of our employees with a disability. In France, it is 5%. And I would claim it should be much higher than that because disability today is around 15% of the population. So why wouldn't it be similar to the population? But in any case, all of our team members that I know that have a disability, I know they make us stronger. So I'm a strong advocate for both of these programs. We've also launched this year a Beauty and Inclusions Award, which we were both looking at together. And we had 8,000 employees involved, and we have 85,000, so that's like 10% of the employees who were involved, and 400 entries resulted. And then we really had difficulties choosing the winners because the entrants were of a very high caliber. There were inclusion awards of different types, so not all of them dealt with disability, but many of them did. One of them was the project for the digitally impaired, and there were several projects about hiring people who are disabled in disadvantaged communities in several of our markets and integrating them into the workforce. So it was highly stimulating, and I can't imagine what we will do, Casey, in the next few years, because in just a few months a lot of things have happened. So thank you very much, and I agree with you. This is about collaborating together, and it's not an area of competition; it's one of collaboration.
But can I add one thing in here? Several years ago, Jean-Paul Agon, he actually identified disability as one of 5 new market areas to increase the revenue of L'Oréal by $1 billion. And so that leadership commitment has brought on all of these developed building cultures. So just to acknowledge, it was one of the first companies to do so. So it's fantastic.
Absolutely. I think it is better for business, and it must not be underestimated. I didn't mention that, of course, we make a lot of products for skin, some of them dermatological, and some of the skin illnesses can be very debilitating if you have a very tough eczema, for instance. It is one of the areas that, of course, we look at also from a business perspective. But in general, I said, I think it just improves business because it reflects what society needs.
Thank you. I also want to highlight the work that you mentioned around mobilizing young people and bringing young people into the equation in the co-design of solutions. One of the things that our members talk about most is breaking the silence on social issues, whether it be disability inclusion or mental health. So, Gabrielle, I want to turn to you next, and I want to ask the question, how common, when we're talking about breaking the silence, how common is disability in the workplace? And what are you doing in terms of inclusive job opportunities? What are the opportunities that you see that need to be replicated?
Well, I come from a region where 85 million people with disabilities are living, and the unemployment rate is about 75%. So it's not common to see, so far in my region, people with disabilities working. And the way we are doing, or the things that we are doing to change that, is to try to prove that you are hiring people, you are hiring talent, and you are not doing something because of charity. You are doing just what you are supposed to do, which is to hire the best available talent in the market. And the best thing that you can do as a company is to look among 100% of the population, not only looking to the 85% that is not having a disability. So we started this journey back in 2013, and we learned a lot of things since that year to here. We are nowadays working in 11 countries in Latin America, working with 600 companies across all industries. Thanks God, 2 of my favorite customers are here. And we are having the chance to work with 250,000 people with disabilities who are registered in our database and are trusting in us in order to make a living. And I know by firsthand how hard it is for a person with a disability to provide for a family, and my father is having a disability, and he got unemployed. And we as a family experience how hard it is for a person used to work to now realize that it's very, very tough to enter into a labor market, that sometimes when the recruiter first see a person with a disability, the things that this person tends to spot is the disability and not the person. So we're working hard to change that perception about the disability, to see the person as a whole, and then understand that disability is only one part of that person. And if you can see the person, you are going to see a lot of talent there, and you're also going to see customers. And if you can see customers, you can provide services and products for those customers. So we are nowadays, I would say, we are a platform to make inclusion happen, because we shift from only doing employment, where we already employed more than 2,000 people with disabilities together with the companies we are working with. And we are helping those companies to create products and services, and also to create, I would say, crazy projects. We are having 1,000 Uber drivers in Buenos Aires City with disabilities, so this is enabling people to create an income. And also training, because one of the things that we saw is that the skills that companies are typically looking are like at this level, but sometimes the skills that people with disabilities are having are lower level. So we're providing training and also working with universities to understand, okay, how many students with disabilities do you have? Because there is no visibility on that. And once you start changing the ecosystem, you understand that, okay, I can have students with disabilities that then can apply to companies like L'Oreal or Procter & Gamble, and they can make a career there. Years ago, that was not the vision of a student with disability. They were saying, okay, all my classmates can have job interviews, but at the time, me as a person with a disability and having a job interview, that interview is going to last 5 minutes instead of an hour or 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. We are changing that, and I think that one of the key assets of the Value 500 and the companies here are doing is to create a ripple effect where you are proving that it's possible to do it, and it's not charity, so it's good business. And if more companies are seeing that, this is how we are just changing life for all these people with disabilities who are systematically being unemployed for ages.
Thank you. Damon, I saw you fervently taking notes. I assume you wanted to respond to something you heard.
Well, I mean, both from the, what I've heard is the power of when we can normalize and bring more people into the conversation, so that we're not talking about the exceptions, right? And that starts with the point of, understanding how many people you have with disabilities as a part of your company. Mm-hmm. Why? Because you never know who you're sitting to. You don't know what people are going through. And when you find out who they are, you encourage those stories to be told. People can have a human connection, right? Is this something I'm doing for a community of people I don't know? Or am I helping Blanca be more effective in her work every day? And Blanca is someone that I know and that I care about. It's a very different way to normalize that conversation and to bring people into it. The insights, whether it's having to do with the product of skin or the product or the products that you were talking about a moment ago, those are the connections that get made when you bring diverse sets of companies together. And I think that's the value of having an initiative like the Valuable 500. We're all at different points in our journey, but if we can find those common insights, those common connections, then we can really spark and build off of what each other are doing and get to the point where our aspirations are realized so much sooner.
Mm-hmm. Blanca, weigh in.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think, the great majority of disabilities are invisible. And the challenge we have is that very few people dare to speak openly about it because of the potential stigma. So we have a lot of programs to try to erase that stigma. And we were just speaking with Caroline a minute ago that if we would have more people in the C-suite to openly talk about disability, and all of us have been touched by disability in one way. Your father had a disability or has a disability. My aunt was born blind, so from a childhood, I've been learning how to live with her, and actually I've learned from her so many things, because she can do a lot of things I could have never imagined, and so I've learned from her. So if you live with people with disabilities, you immediately get this empathy and this understanding, and you also relate to them as with normality, which is a very important thing. So I think it's important to, as you were saying, Damon, uncover the disabilities in a team, encourage people to talk about them, encourage openness, sensibility. There are some mental health issues which are hard to deal with, for instance, which require a lot of attention and care and sensibility. So I think it's important that we do that with the visible and the non-visible disabilities. And I also think that it's important in organizations to tap into those people that are sensitive to this and that are the catalysts for change. In our organization, you know, we have Jean-Claude Legrand, who's an incredible guy. We have Margaret, who leads inclusion and diversity at the organization. In the team of France, we have Anne-Laure Thomas, who has a child with a disability, who has done an enormous amount. So France, I think, as I was saying, already has 5% of employees with disabilities. So I think it's important to find those guys that are able to see and to move this forward.
I want to pick up on the issue of the C-suite telling stories. So a piece of research that was done for us by EY before we launched the Valuable 500, 7% of our CEOs have a lived experience of disability, sort of like when Elon Musk came out and spoke about his Asperger's, right? But 4 out of 5 of them are not declaring or not owning it. I mean, I was in the disability closet for a long time, so I know. What that means is we're not creating cultures of trust. And I think what it points to is that you talked about this moment of receptivity, I think, is about it's not just the telling of the stories, but when people are willing and able to hear the stories so that we can have that impact. So it's incredibly important that the choices these leaders make will affect the culture of the organizations. And just to be clear, so we're talking good news here today. I just need to acknowledge there is an inequality crisis facing disability, just so we're really clear. You know, 50% more likely to experience poverty, 50% less likely to get a job. 90% of children don't get into a classroom if they have a disability. In the Ukraine war, who do you think was left behind? Because we didn't put disability thinking into the emergency and evacuation strategies. Why is business so important? Because the scale of this problem is too big, so we need business in, and we need the stories, and we need the voice out there. And I want to go back to Gabrielle's point about this. We don't need charity, because charity makes us dependent. We need empowerment. We need the opportunity to use our voices and our talent and our different lived experience that will deliver, yes, innovation and yes, insight to the bottom line of business. I have so many opportunities to prove that. But this is about society, and we are emerging from a pandemic, and we must do it differently. And if we think about this metaverse that we're all going into, are we designing inclusivity from the beginning? Are the voices of people with disabilities right in there so that we do not make the same mistakes? We cannot come back unequal again.
Thank you, Caroline. Gabrielle, I want to let you weigh in, and then I'd like to come back. We are nearing the end of today's press conference. I want to finish with a call to action, but do you want to respond to that?
Just building on the culture of trust. We typically, when we start working with companies, we run a diagnosis on where the company is among inclusive culture and to understand how many people with disabilities are working in this company. And the data set that we have is pretty standardized. And once we, as a company, start building a culture of asking, and people are not getting afraid of having the disclosure of a disability, you can see numbers improving by themselves, I would say, because we're having an example of a company saying, okay, it was a huge company, and they were in the first data set that we ran with them, only 10 people with disabilities were found there. And after a year, we ran the same survey, and it was 150. And it wasn't because they start hiring people with disabilities, but it was because the whole company understood that if you can do the disclosure of your disability, you are not going to have a punishment in your career, but you can speak about what needs do you have in order to perform a better job. So it comes back to create human connections and understand that all differences in the workplace are making us a better organization.
Thank you. As we wrap up today's session, Caroline, final remarks, calls to action. What can participants here in Davos do to support your work?
Well, firstly, I'm going to pick off what Gabrielle was saying. This is about human connection. After George Floyd's murder, I was asked by a journalist, are you concerned the issue of race is going to overshadow disability? No, not at all. Inclusion means all for everyone. What about disabled black people? And what the shout out is to stop this siloed thinking around inclusion, holding one identity against another. It's ridiculous. So to everybody who is out there in your business, if you're a young person in your business and you're passionate about, it doesn't matter how passionate about inclusion, but ask the disability question. Number two, our valuable 500 companies, get your talent, get them into us. We have 75 places, if not more, just before the end of the year. And thirdly, I'm going to shout out to our friends in One Young World who helped us really get onto the stage of Davos, which many of our companies are part of. You get your companies getting that talent into this first cohort. And to end just by saying thank you, because it's through collaboration that we will genuinely see this change happen and look at this collective. So I leave here hopeful, but still troublemaking and hustling.
Thank you. And thank you today to all of our panelists for joining us for today's press conference. On behalf of the Global Shapers community, I need to do a last and final thank you to Caroline. Caroline had a conversation a few years in Davos with 2 young change makers. Thanks to that conversation with just 2 people, Global Shapers around the world have made commitments in over 80 cities towards disability and inclusion. That was 2 people. What you can do with 500 young people.
And 22 million employees.
It's incredible, and it makes me very optimistic
And that's
for a more
Tiffany Wu and
inclusive.
Crystal. We have to shout out for them. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining today's press conference. That wraps today's session. Enjoy the rest of your time in Davos.
Thank you.